Okay, well, I'm going to call the meeting to order because it's 6:23. Is that okay with everybody? I got a thumbs up from ARRL. That takes care of that. For starters, let's do member introductions. And if you would, we have a new pretty sign-in form. So pass it all around and introduce yourself, sign your name, your call sign, and we'll take it from there. I'm John, N7NWL.
And I'm Virgil, K7VZ.
Richard, N7NT.
Mike, N7MW.
Bob, K7BHM.
Ron, WA0KDS.
Bob, NA7RH.
I'm Ned, AA7A. Brian, W7JET.
Walt, NJHE.
Norm, N9AV.
W7IXA.
Dick, HR1K2LCT.
Santan Valley.
We're good. That takes care of, I'm sorry, Zoom people.
Mike, KC7V.
Warren, KC0GU.
Lee, KY7M.
Steve, K7 Sugar Papa.
KF7A. Jim.
There's the other Jim. He's the neighbor, which is true. He's about 3 miles down the road. Moving right on from that, program tonight is the FlexRadio 8000 series overview. Mike Walker is going to, VA3 Mike Whiskey is going to be doing the presentation. So Mike, it's way above my head, but some of our folks have Flex radios and some of them are interested in them. So if you would take it away, please, sir, that will take care of that and I will be quiet.
Okay, thanks for having me, and let me just share the correct screen. There we go, screen 3. How's that? That look okay? Make it through? Yes, no? Guys online? Somebody nod.
That looks good, thanks.
Yes, that's
right,
okay. It's 59K.
One day it was a whole broadcast and it ended up being my big widescreen. Of course, nobody could see any slides, so I have to ask. I'm Mike, VA3MW. I work for FlexRadio. I've been here for about 7 or 8 years. In my previous real life career, which was nowhere near as fun as this one, I was in the data protection, data backup world, and I taught people how to debug problems, and which we'd think is pretty easy, but it turns out some of us are better at it than others. So in May 2024, which is this year, we announced a new product to replace our Flex HF radios, the 6000 line. But first off, what is a Flex radio? Well, Flex makes HF radios. They're your typical 100-watt HF radio that transmit from 160 through to 6 meters. They have transverter ports on them. They have receiving antenna ports on them, and they're pretty versatile radios. And we seem to get this misnomer that you have to jump in here about $5,000 to get started, and nothing could be further from the truth. A new one's about $2,500, but even an older, one of the first least expensive ones in this series that we released, called the 6300, you can find those online for $1,000 to $1,100 US dollars, and yet they still run the same software we ship out today, and a new version we're going to ship out tomorrow almost, or next week, which makes them really future-proof for the most part. I can't think of any other HF radio where I've not had to replace it every 3 years to get the latest feature functionality. And if you're an HF operator and you owned something like an ICOM 756 Pro and that whole series, you know exactly what I mean, because they actually got us, 3 times? Between the Pro 2, and the Pro 3. So they do something called direct sampling, and this is what software-defined radios generally do. A direct sampling HF radio is different than the 100-year-old technology we know as super heterodyne. And by using direct sampling radios, we use less components to build. It makes the radio less expensive. it also makes it a better performer, because the difference between a good HF radio and a poor HF radio is how much work the engineers did in dealing with all the mixers. And the mixers are noisy. And that's why some radios, like a top-end ICOM 7600 in the superhit world, was so expensive. It's because it's so much effort to clean up the mixer noise. And I have a whole talk that talks about mixers and whatever, and how they are really not the best thing for HF radio. Direct sampling, like what we do, where it really means we take all the RF energy from the antenna and we convert that immediately into numbers so that we can deal with them in a really fast computer called a field programmable gate array. FPGA is the term. And we actually, crunch from 30 kilohertz to 54 megahertz 100% of the time. So that means you can take a receiver, and we have they come with 2, 4, and you could get 8, meaning you could put these receivers anywhere on the HF band and hook them up to a multi-band antenna and use them to receive. And then you just move the transmitter around as you need to. And I jokingly say you could be sitting there doing 6-meter FT8 or waiting for it on 50 megahertz, but at the same time while you're listening to a baseball game, an AM broadcast on the same radio. So that's a pretty powerful tool that nobody else does. So what makes it really different today? Well, as I was just saying previously, all of our radios are contest grade radios, and that's sort of the benchmark about how good is the radio. It's not about sensitivity, it's about selectivity, the ability to hear the signal you want to hear. All of them come with a transmitting algorithm called controlled envelope single sideband, and this gives you more talk power. This essentially makes your 100 watts sound like 200 watts, or your 1500 watt sideband sound like 3000 watts. I mentioned the future-proof part, and if you ever wanted to do remote operation, and that really means I don't have the radio sitting here on the desk, but it could be on my desk, under my desk, the room behind me, or half a world away. You don't need to be a magical network engineer to make it work. Little commercial, new radios come with a 2-year warranty, and you can actually extend that to 4 years. And I don't know anybody else that does that. So in this year, we built a new Maestro, and that's if you Motorola guys in the old FM days remember control heads. Well, this is the control head for the HF radio. I have my Maestro right here. My radio is 100 miles away, and I use my Maestro to control the radio. Nice big radio, nice big display, big knobs. Don't need a magnifying glass to read the etchings on the screen, and it's limited to the buttons and knobs we use all the time. Not like something like an FTDX 5000, and I counted, has 118 buttons and knobs with multiple levels of shift and function, usually 3. So we find that people find this incredibly intuitive to use. The other way to control a Flex radio is by Smart SDR. It's a software client. If you're not used to using a computer, people convert really quickly because they can make it nice and big and easy to read, rather than, again, looking for what knob, where's the power knob, and type of thing. So if you were a Flex consumer before, this new Maestro, which is our 3rd in a series, and the first one came out about 9 years ago, we made it better, faster, brighter, better Wi-Fi, put a battery in it. You can run around for about 8 hours with it in your house. That means you can just grab it and go. I know a lot of senior HF operators like to listen to get on their nets. It's not uncommon for them to have a radio downstairs, and then when they go upstairs to have lunch, they flip a switch to run to the coax upstairs, and they get a second radio upstairs so they can listen to their buddies or whatever. You can hook up a HDMI display to the Maestro. I can't put HDMI in a publication without paying them a royalty, type of thing. It's got new mic connector and rapid charging, but we won't go into the gory details of that. All of our radios integrate with this really cool high power amplifier and this incredibly fast and broad ranged high power tuner called the Power Genius XL and the Tuner Genius XL. And they all integrate very seamlessly because you just plug a LAN cable into them, and we use the LAN to communicate when to go in and out of transmit, what the frequencies are in use, and no specialized cables. Where, if you've gotten a new amp or a new HF device, you had to build or buy an interface cable, and where none of us are getting any younger. So, trying to solder 4 or 5 wires onto a DB9 has gotten to be a bit more of a challenge for some of us. By using the LAN as the interfacing tool, makes it incredibly more efficient. And if you happen to be an SO2R contest operator, it's still incredibly efficient. If you were to drop a radio, an amplifier, and a tuner, and a PC with N1MM on it, I could have that fully configured for SO2R in about 10 minutes. So for my FlexRadio customers, are any in the room? Couple? Warren, I see, okay, and somebody else. Believe it or not, we actually are going to see, I got you. Tuner Genius integration into Smart SDR with the Power Genius. So that'll be nice as a screen here showing, looks awful like the Tuner Genius or the Power Genius control window. You got an indicator at the bottom. And then we're going to have meters. Now, why we want to put analog meters into an incredibly accurate digital meter, I don't know, but I like the meters. They look cool, and you'll be able to see power and a couple of other different things on them. And by the way, I'm in high speed mode, so just so we get through in time. So what's new with the 8000? So we built the 6000 series starting in 2012 with the Flex 6300, the Flex 6500, and the Flex 6700. And typically the life cycle in today's world for anything electronics is about 6 or 7 years before you have to think about retooling or doing it differently. And it's because the manufacturers of the components just, when they go on to the next level, we've gotten to smaller, faster. Look at radios when we first started. We had spark gap, then we had tubes, then we had transistors, then we had integrated circuits, and more semiconductors, and everything got smaller and smaller and smaller. Just look at the motor, the bag phone to our iPhone and how it's gotten smaller. By the way, for another presentation, I do have a trick question. How many in the room own a software-defined radio? Trick question. Okay, so the rest of you don't own a cell phone. Told you it was a trick question. They're software-defined radios, okay? Same idea. So we call it like a Band-Aid. Well, it's not really a Band-Aid if you bought it from somebody else, but. So the next generation of 8000 radio, and we had a lot of good features, and we have still really foundation features in the 6000, where we've gotten away from all these interconnect cables and used software interfacing. We've made it incredibly simple if you've never used it, but my Flex customers will tell you, it took them a couple of days to understand CAT and DAX, and then when they saw what it was about, it made perfect sense. One of them is used for radio control, and the other one's used for audio management on a PC. But it allowed us to interface just about any other program we've used in the past for FLDigi digital operations and stuff. I haven't found anything that really doesn't work. So we built a new radio. We kept the chassis the same and the front panel the same. The reason for that is it costs a lot of money to retool those things. And if we don't have to spend it to build it, that also means we can keep the price down when we sell it to you. Just like the time you bought a new computer, the CPU is now 4 times faster. That's the a Linux computer that runs a whole bunch of stuff. And then the field programmable gate array is twice as fast, and that's a huge improvement in that world. The same thing is said for the when we get to the M series, which has a display on the front, much faster display on that. We've added a new GPS inside the radio called the GNSS. And what this does is we'll keep the radio on frequency. This is included for free, but to a frequency accuracy of about 1/2 hertz at 54 megahertz, which is a pretty good resolution, or pretty good accuracy, right? Pretty good precision. When, if you go down into 80 meters, it gets a whole lot better. It's measured in parts per billion. And that can be upgraded to our GPS DO, that's GPS disciplined oscillator. It's something you have to order with the radio, but that allows you to give even more precision, about 3 times more accuracy. But it also gives you a 10 meg reference signal. If you happen to have other stuff in your shack that requires a 10 meg reference, then you can use it to do that as well. This screen gives you an idea of the different models. We have the 84, the 84M, 86, and the 86M. And the M means the Maestro front panel display. It's built into the radio. So everything else is the same between the 84 and the 84M, other than the display, which is this check marks down here. The 400 series comes with 2, we call them slices, but that's the receiver. And the 600 comes with 4. But you can also get 2 transverter ports. If you happen to be a weak signal person, or you're into satellite work, I do a lot of satellite work with this, my screen's backwards with this radio right here. And you see it's not on my desk. It's got 2 transverters hooked up to it. And if you've done satellite work or been with anybody, they like to run in full duplex so they can listen to their downlink. And that radio is quite capable of doing it. These radios also have the 600 series diversity reception, so you can use 2 antennas at the same time to receive. So here's a look at the back. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but it looks like the back of a radio. You've got 2 antenna ports on the 400 series. This is a switch. You can use one or the other. On the 600 series, you can use both of them at the same time, which is the biggest difference between the 400 series and the 600 series is it's like using 2 radios at the same time, and then you just, maybe I'm on 40 and 20, and or I'm running, if I'm contesting, it's just a good example. I'm running on 20 and I'm sort of listening on 40 or something. I just click over to 40 and the transmitter immediately flips in milliseconds. So unlike other HF radios, we have multiple main receivers, not main and sub receivers. These are all main receivers. One huge difference is we have 3 push to talk, 3 PTT ports for keying amplifiers or preamps or sequencers, and it's built like a sequencer. You can hook up a display to the M model, just like I said on the Maestro. You've got either, depending on the model, either one transverter and one receiver, or like the 600, you get both. And I think Steve's, has this animated. 10 meg out, as I was mentioning, 10 meg in. All radios can receive a 10 megahertz N reference if you happen to already have that in your shack. And here's the second input for the 8600 series. I'll just skip this because we don't need to go into depth, but GNSS uses a number of satellite systems for its satellite reference. And it, you can see here's the coverage area as well, and this could be expanded as well. So let's talk about intermodulation distortion. Now this slide comes from the cellular world, but it applies directly to us as well. When we transmit generally on sideband today and on pretty much every other radio other than Anons, our transmitted signal looks a lot like the red part. But we will have a feature called adaptive predistortion coming up next after we ship radios next week, and we start moving software people onto the task of that cleans this up and makes your transmitted signal look nice and clean. And if you ever watched an HF signal on a waterfall, you'll see it's a good signal is a beautiful column, and a bad signal really splatters. And a really bad signal, you can actually flip to the opposite sideband and actually hear what they're saying. And in another presentation, I have a example of that. So why do we care about intermodulation distortion? Well, we do, because it's good to be polite, and B, you got to be legal. So in the predistortion types, there's 2 different types. There's static and adaptive. The static one is not what we're doing, but it's the type of thing where you run the radio through a calibration, and the radio then makes the corrections, and it gives you a reasonably clean signal. You get about an 8 to 15 dB improvement. Adaptive runs real time, and it's always adjusting, and it gives you a lot more improvement up to 15 to 25 dB of improvement in adaptive pre-distortion. So how does the wiring look on this? Well, on a Flex standalone radio, just by itself, it's all built in. You don't have to do anything. You just turn it on. So we grab a quick drink. If you happen to have a Power Genius XL, there's a tap on it, a minus 60 dBc tap, and that feeds right back into the radio. So you always sample the last RF amplifier for adaptive pre-distortion. And then if you happen to have a third party, you can have your amplifier here in some sort of sampler, and it's the same idea as well. And for my Flex customers, if you worry that you're giving up a receiving port for this, we're planning on having a hardware switch box that will allow you to still use it as a receiving port, but except because we only use the receiving port while we're in reception, and we only use the sampler while we're in transmission, so we can flip back and forth. This one's a little bit, how do I want to wear? This is the future. So FT8 operators, anybody in the room? HF operators? You know, if you were trying to get hold of a DXpedition on FT8, right? You got about 500 people jammed into under 3 kilohertz. Well, some of the DXpedition operators, actually many, have asked us to come up with a way to expand that gets us out of this little, 3 kilohertz of bandwidth, and maybe increase that to 3 times or 4 or 10. And it would not affect how you and I operate, but it's a lot like in a DXpedition when they're running CW and they say, we're up, that will give them that flexibility. Now we can provide the ability for the receiver to receive all this data, but it still needs to be managed in software. So the WSJT, the JTDX guys we need to get them on board. This is just a big idea that we're thinking of. Hopefully it will happen, and it shouldn't impact us. And no, it doesn't mean we're going to be transmitting over, 20 kilohertz of bandwidth. We would still be maintaining that 3 kilohertz, ish span, but it might be, we might have just jumped up 8 kilohertz to work in 3 kilohertz. I know that could sound a bit confusing, and I guarantee that concept's all going to change, but it's something to think about. The new 8000s have a built-in time server. So how would you like your own time server in your own shack? So you can have your phones and everything and your computer and WSJT and FT8. Check with your radio to see what time your time is, and you'll be exactly on time. So that's an NTP time server. And and there's actually a slide missing here. There's one thing I didn't talk about. Coming up as well, with the faster radio and the faster computers in the radio, we've got to, and we are going to build more improvements in the software and more features, such as better noise mitigation. For our old Flex customers that remember the beam steering that we had on the 5000, it's not impossible that we could go back to that type of thing, and maybe some improvements in noise reduction, noise subtraction. There's a lot of whole ideas here. We haven't quite gotten to a roadmap on that because we've been very busy getting the radio out the door, which we're going to start shipping next week. So there, I combined that and got that down to 17 minutes in the high-speed mode, but maybe it gives us a few minutes to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Do we have questions from folks? I know we've got about half a dozen Flex owners. We got 6 or 8 SDR radio owners, and some that are thinking about them. So questions for Mr. Mike? Richard.
Yeah, Mike, Richard, N7NT. I got a 6600 and I really like it, man. It's one of the coolest radios I've ever owned in more than 50 years. The control panels, are you locked into the vertical format still, or can we pull out the individual modules and scatter them across the screen as needed in the next generation?
Hang on, you can now. Ask me another question. In the meantime, I'll set up a screen so you can see it.
That's the only question I had.
And let me just find
the 8000s will work with the current 3.74. How soon, or is there?
That's a good question.
How soon until there's new software versions out?
So the next version is going to be 3.8. It was 17, 18, or 19. I'm going to share the screen again. Oh, you're really grumpy. I'm trying to share a screen, but I did a virtual screen switch, so it didn't like that. Okay, hang on a second. To go back to your question, the currently at 3.7.4 is the release that we have today. The 8000s will require 3.8, which we're coming out with, and 3.817, and that will also run in the 6000 series. And you saw me jumping around screens there. Okay, here we go. Here's to answer your question. So here's a typical smart SDR screen, and you were asking, do you see up here? You can actually pop stuff out. You know, by pushing this little arrow, you probably never noticed it. And if I had a second pan adapter, I can pop it out here too, in the upper right corner of each. So, you know, here's, and you can sort of put that in another screen or whatever. Does that answer your question? I can see you, so you can just nod.
No, I'm referring to the individual panels on the vertical panel, like for the amplifier,
no,
the transmitter. They're locked in a vertical format.
Yeah, you're stuck there, but I'll pass that on. I think you're not the first request.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next question.
More questions? Oh, got one coming this way.
When is the delivery going to be sent out?
For the 8000s?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have one on order, or are you thinking of just ordering?
A friend of mine has one on order.
Yeah, I'm asking for a friend. It depends. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. So we're going to start shipping. The shipping's going to go like this. We try to get, I can't give out specific numbers, but a whole bunch will go out in the first week. And then you sort of want to sit on it and slow down for week 2 in case you really broke something, which, you know, Murphy is an optimist. So you don't have to pay to ship them all back in to fix them. The worst thing could happen, we have a hardware problem, which is what's delayed us up until this week, is we were chasing an issue, and it got resolved a week ago, and it's been through a week of, we think we've got it. So if you were to place an order today, in theory, you're not going to see it till the end of December, but shipping will go like really quick and then slow down. And then once we're pretty confident that everything's stable, I know Paul, he's just going to make people work 24 hours, and he'll build like half of it in 3 weeks and get them all out, because, you know, it's revenue. I always like revenue type of thing. So we still are telling, because there's a lot of radios on order, telling people if you order today, it's going to be sort of mid to late December. But believe me, if we can get them out any faster, we will. And if your friend ordered in the first hour of Dayton, then he'll probably see it in the next 2 weeks. But we sold a lot of radios at Dayton. So it's going to take us about a month to get through just the Dayton orders.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Again, I appreciate it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't invite you back again.
Well, thanks. Any questions? You can just, I didn't have a slide for this, and my apologies. Just email, there's a form on the website, but sales@flexradio.com, or hams actually at flexradio.com. If you have any questions or whatever, if you've got a radio on order, don't email us and say, when's my radio going to ship? Because we really can't tell you. So, and we get about 80 of those a day that we unfortunately ignore, but I can honestly say that we're treating everybody equally and not answering any of them. But we take a lot of heat for it. But do you ever, you know what it's like when you guys, we're none of us are retired like you guys, right? So, but anyway, so that's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And we will see you later.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure to meet you. Take care.